The rusty comet, with a burst of blue flame, the plasma bow blasted across the bar and set one of the Boar warrior bears ablaze. When the screams echoed throughout the room, the elderly bartender didn't even bat an eye. He gently wiped a glass, muttered something about amateur hour, and with the same hand reached under the counter. What followed was a spoon-launched tactical nuke that made the pub doors crash. Steel slammed, lights dimmed. There was the stench of singed alien fur in the air. The warrior howled and clawed at his blazing target, his eyes locked in silent terror. His beard smoked while his 6 brothers searched the area, now perplexed by the elderly man behind the bar. I looked up. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "Have you two ever been in a true bar fight?" That was when everyone understood this was more than just a tavern. And the bartender, he wasn't just a random relic serving up the drinks. The rusty comet had always been an odd place, orbiting a pricey whiskey moon. A final stop for interstellar truckers and pirate scum riding the edges of the Delos Belt, a place where rare fugitives pretended to be passers-by and old bounty hunters came to fade away. Despite the lack of appeal, there was a flickering neon sign, cracked windows taped over with strips of foil, and a smell that said someone once tried to deep-fry a starfish and failed. The rule was simple: no politics, no war, no bloodshed, just cards and beverages. And the only reason that rule held was the man behind the bar. Everyone called him Old Joe, with squinty eyes, gnarled, hands like tree roots and a gait that suggested he didn't rush for anything, not even death. He never smiled, rarely spoke, just cleaned and poured drinks with unsettling precision. No one knew his past. Most were too scared to ask. The cloth slung over his shoulder looked older than the Terran Alliance. Some whispered about covert wars, others about desertion. But to the regulars, Joe wasn't just a man. He was part of the furniture, solid, immovable, strangely comforting. That illusion shattered the moment the Bra clan stormed in. They were massive, hulking things born for war. They strode in like they owned the room, tusks like bone blades, voices like war drums. They shoved chairs, flipped tables, and laughed like thunder. One hurled a plasma axe at the jukebox while, screaming about real music, when it exploded, they cheered. Another grabbed a wiry mechanic named Dex, spun him midair, and flung him out the door like a used rag. No one moved, not out of fear, but because they were watching Joe. He stayed silent. That's when the jeering started. "This prune calls himself a bartender?" Another pounded his fists on the bar. "Hey, Fossil, got something with more bite?" Joe didn't blink, just poured a drink and slid it across. They laughed until one fell twitching to the ground. The others paused, confused, then laughed harder. Joe calmly poured another. "There was a time," he began. His voice wasn't loud, but it had weight, like a whisper made of lead. The Bra kept shouting, throwing mugs, pounding tables. One even vomited in a booth. Then the corner clock struck midnight. Click. A faint sound from beneath the bar. The lights dimmed. Steel shutters slammed over the windows. The laughter faded. Panic began to bloom. They realized they were trapped. One snarled and reached for his sword. Joe looked up. Calm. Cold. "It's not a joke," he said, and the temperature dropped. Lady Vex, watching from her corner booth, didn't flinch. Her cybernetically enhanced eyes gleamed beneath her hood. She smiled. She'd been watching Joe for weeks. She knew he was more than he seemed. "Oh," she whispered. "They're so screwed." A Korga, the largest of the Bra, growled and drew a war club. "Open the doors, old man." Joe raised an eyebrow, took a sip, pressed a second button. The floor shimmered. Stools shifted. The pool table vanished into the ground. Overhead lights hummed, then burst. Laser-thin beams sliced across the room. One warrior lifted his club to strike and was launched into the wall by a hidden cannon in the liquor shelf. Joe moved like a man 50 years younger, dodging attacks, tossing explosive bottles in perfect arcs. One warrior charged. Joe ducked. The stool tripped the beast. Another tried a shock blade but was fried by the overhead lights. Joe didn't break a sweat. It wasn't a fight. It was poetry. Brutal, efficient, silent poetry. The bra dropped one by one until only the Akorga remained. He snarled, armor flashing, weapons drawn. "You're just a washed-up bartender," he screamed. Joe stepped forward, put down his glass. "You're right," he said, smiling for the first time in 20 years. "This place used to be a war crimes tribunal execution site. You know who ran it?" Joe blinked, and the emergency lights cut out. Darkness. Red emergency pulses flickered to life. Shadows stretched. The bar was silent. Joe was gone, and Akorga stood breathing heavy, armor humming. One warrior moaned, another was unconscious halfway through the dartboard. Akorga crept forward, growling. "Is that what people do now?" he barked. But no answer came. Only the distorted reflection of shattered mirrors. Then a voice, dry, cold, ancient. "We used to charge head-on, then we learned the shadows fight smarter." A plasma blast shredded the booth. Meanwhile, deep beneath, the floor. Lady Vex moved like she belonged through Wartech halls, swiping ancient codes, dancing through memories she'd tried to bury. By the time she reached the war room, she knew. She saw her father's insignia, wiped dust off the screen and brought up the files. The truth played in front of her. The Bra warlord, her father, had surrendered, proposed peace, but the council erased it, silenced it. Vex's hands trembled. They didn't want justice, they wanted him gone. She pulled the data drive. She had what she came for. Upstairs, Akorga roared and flipped a table. "You hide like prey." He spat. Joe stepped out from the shadows, but he wasn't a bartender now. He wore a torn vest, a vision patch, and the eyes of a soldier who'd seen too much. "That's the problem," Joe said, placing a heavy case on the bar. "I was a soldier. Now, I'm just tired," Akorga charged. Joe opened the case, pulled out a foldable pulse rifle complete with a bottle opener. One shot straight to the chest. It didn't kill him. It froze his armor mid-jump. Akorga crashed like a dropped fridge. Joe walked past him. "You ever clean that armor?" he asked. "Smells like sheep, regret, and fungus." Akorga twitched. Joe knelt down. "You killed my father," the warrior snarled. Joe paused. The air seemed to hold its breath. "Your father was a warlord," Joe whispered. "We beat him. I offered surrender. He chose death." "You lie. Check the archives," Joe said quietly. "They don't want you to see that." Below, Vex found it. The final proof. Her fingers trembled. She had the data. Her father had begged for peace. The council had ignored it. She pulled the drive, ran back up. In the bar, Akorga rose. Joe stood tall. "I locked the doors," Joe said. "Not to kill you, but to get your attention. You came here for blood, but what you found was the truth." With bone-crunching force, the hunter burst beneath him, throwing the assailant against the ceiling before crushing him to the ground once more amid a pile of shattered armor. The other two responded immediately, turning and shooting at the bar. Joe had pushed Vex behind a steel column as plasma shots crashed into the counter, splintering the wood and exploding bottles. He ducked, threw a metal shaker into the air, and fired it mid-air. The blast drove a shrapnel wave into the closest. Vex popped out and shot, putting the final one down just after the hunter sent him flying. Joe was already moving, his gun slung over his leg, wounded but not lethally. When the acrid smoke cleared, 3 hunters were dead. 2 were still alive, and moaning. Joe cleared the room with ruthless efficiency. One unmoving Joe simply walked over and took a sidearm off the scout, murmured that he checked the charge. Scout and the closest body meeting the rest, Joe shrugged. "How many more?" he asked. Vex crawled back into cover, panting. "No matter how many it takes to permanently lock me up," she muttered. Then the sensors lit up. Movement. Joe opened up a screen. 6 more heat signatures. They were coming through every entrance simultaneously. Joe stared at the tunnel system. They weren't taking chances. After examining Vex, the fusion cores decided. "Confine them here," he stated. "If the files are broadcast, you take the drive to the relay tower." Vex grabbed his arm. "I can't silence the truth. It won't matter if they kill me. Joe gazed at her as they moved. A glimmer of warmth pierced through the steel. You're quick, I'm obstinate. You'll make it, I probably won't. He hesitated, jaw clenched. You were gone from me once more. Vex's voice fell. I thought that was the only way to keep you safe. Wanted a father, not safety. The silence between them was more painful than the gunfire. Then he said, let's raise some hell together. Joe nodded. They moved while Vex uploaded the broadcast. Charges were placed. Main entrances, supply crates, power nodes. She keyed the sequence into her comm rig, knowing the next wave was minutes away. Then the back wall rocked with explosions. Tribunal enforcers barged in as Vex ran to the relay hub. A bullet clipped Joe's shoulder. From behind an overturned table, he didn't slow down. When a hunter got too close, Joe rammed a bare leg into him. Vex reached the console, through the drive, into the uplink, and fired point-blank through a visor. Thousands of files began flowing. Public networks, news relays, pirate signals. Access granted, symbols lit up. The truth's flow was unstoppable. Joe behind her, a wall,